To kind of get started, how many people here are familiar with behavior analysis? Okay, a pretty good amount of individuals. So a lot of people in the community of Down syndrome actually aren't that familiar. So this is a pretty big percentage of people. How many people here have heard me present before? Oh, all newbies. Okay, great. All right. So I'll go ahead and get started. So what behavior analysis is, it's a branch of psychology that focuses on observable behaviors. So whereas traditional psychology looks at thoughts, feelings, and cognition, in behavior analysis, we're saying not that those aren't important, but that we can't rely on children, especially children with delays or language delays, to tell us why they're doing what they're doing. Most neurotypical adults can't tell us why they're doing what they're doing, right? So we can't rely on children with delays to tell us why they're doing what they're doing. So we look at behaviors, and in behavior analysis, that's anything a person is doing we can observe. So eating, walking, talking, social interactions, tying your shoe, doing math homework. So we look at the behaviors and what's occurring before a behavior and after a behavior to evoke and maintain those. And then we analyze the function, and if it's an inappropriate behavior that we don't want to see happening, we determine an appropriate replacement behavior to teach. Or if it's the absence of a desired behavior, we look at the environmental kind of conditions on what we need to do to increase opportunities to learn that and how to teach that. And sometimes it's a behavior that does exist in the repertoire. You know your child can do it, but for some reason they don't do it nearly as often as they need to. And so we look at that and manipulate kind of those variables to help them be more successful on that. So really, when you boil it down, all it is just really effective teaching strategies. So there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about behavior analysis out there. I can certainly speak on all of these if anybody is interested. Hopefully by the end of this talk, a lot of these myths or misconceptions will be put to rest. If by the end, though, you are not convinced, come talk to me, okay? Come talk to me. All right, so when I am going through this, a lot of the concepts kind of come together in a big picture. So if you have a question about a specific concept or that kind of term, that principle of behavior we're discussing, go ahead and ask me kind of in that moment, feel free. But if you are hearing me talk about something and you're like, oh, my child does this or I do this, wait until the end, hold those questions till the end, because this does kind of come together in a big picture. And oftentimes when families will ask questions like, oh, well, when they're doing this, I'm like, I'm about to talk about this concept that will kind of come into it. So let's get all those terms kind of down first, and then we can talk about specific behaviors or situations that occur, okay? So in behavior analysis, so I kind of already touched on this, a behavior is an observable event. So we do discriminate between desired behaviors and undesired behaviors. Obviously, children will engage in behaviors that we'd rather they not. But philosophically, we believe the child is never wrong. So in behavior analysis, we say anything they are doing is right by them. They are only doing things that work to get their wants and needs met, and it is the world around them that has shaped those behaviors. So it is our responsibility as the caretakers to make sure that we're teaching them the desired behaviors, the socially acceptable behaviors. All right. So again, a behavior is an observable event, and a lot of times we'll have individuals who are not as familiar with behavior analysis describe behaviors in terms of what we normally see as like emotions. So they might say their child is angry, but we say, really, we can't understand what anger looks like by just using that term to describe it. We need to have like the physical description basically of the behavior, because what is angry for me is very different for anger for someone else. When I get angry, I go real flat and get kind of a resting, face a little bit. But other people might get like really red and like ball their fist up and shake. So we want to look at the actual behavior itself. Some people might have anxiety that looks like nail biting. And so people are like, oh, my child's really anxious, and they're dropping to the floor. So again, we want to look at what does the actual behavior look like. So I tell people to describe it to me, kind of the sequence, in a little way that I can kind of see it in like a movie in my head. But Any questions on what a behavior is? No? Okay, great. We'll move on. In behavior analysis, we look at socially significant behaviors. So pretty much what we want to focus on are things that are going to have an immediate impact for that child or their family. So a lot of times that might be language acquisition, toilet training, compliance, academic skills, daily living skills. The list can go on and on. But basically, I tell people pretty much anything you would want your child to learn, we can teach through the principles of behavior. So behavior analysis is not a set of goals. It's just simply a teaching strategy. So it could be answering a phone appropriately. It can be swimming. It can be walking down the hallway without flopping to the ground. It can be eating a wider variety of foods. Pretty much the sky's the limit on what we can use our science to teach. And another thing too with our science, we also believe that with the right teaching strategies, most people can learn anything that we try to teach them. So we do not work with a learner and find like, oh, we're having a hard time teaching this, so they're probably just not going to learn it and give up. We are like, nope, we just haven't found the effective way to teach it yet. So we're going to keep tweaking and tweaking until we figure out what's going to be an effective strategy for them. So in behavior analysis, what we do is we look at the functions of behavior, okay? So this is kind of the why behind what we're doing, the reason why we do what we do. We know by human nature, we are lazy, right? Like no one's gonna do something just to do it. It's gotta serve a purpose, right? We're gonna take the path of least resistance every time. So any behaviors that we're doing it because it serves a function for us. And for our benefit, fortunately, our kids are not so complicated. They're not trying to be mischievous or malicious. They really are just trying to get their wants and needs met. And so we can pretty much categorize any behavior into 3 categories. So I know a lot of times, especially as parents, we'll try to get into we'll get into these cycles and we'll be like, oh, well, maybe they didn't sleep well last night, or, you know, their dad's out of town and this happened and this happened. And so we'll come up with these really complicated explanations for why things are happening. But most of the time it's much more simple than that, fortunately for us. Now, humans are complicated creatures, right? Our behaviors can be rather complex, but our kids are not trying to trick us, okay? So the why behind what we do. So it can fit into 3 categories. The first one, it's to gain access. I want access to your attention. I want access to the iPad. I want that ice cream I saw in the freezer. I want to go do this something. All right, so I want something, I want access to it, so I'm engaging in this behavior to get that thing. All right, the other one's escape. I don't want to do that task. I don't want to brush my teeth. I don't want to do my math homework. I have a headache, I want it to go away. I have cramps, I want them gone. I don't like this person sitting next to me, I want them to move. All right, so access, escape, and then the third one is what we call automatic reinforcement. That's the sensory input. So it's like scratching an itch, twirling your hair. Our kids do those sort of things too. Some of them do it at a level that's much more prevalent than others. So you might see hand flapping, you might see flapping items, you might see them looking out of the corner of their eye, but things that just feel good, rocking, those sort of things. All right, so any questions on that? Any questions on that? Okay, so really again, as I said, they try to make it simple for us, fits into these 3 categories. However, it can get a little more complicated for when that same behavior serves multiple functions. So I can kick you when I want access to a cookie. I can kick you when I don't want to brush my teeth. And I can kick you when I want to get a big reaction out of you. So it can be the same behavior, but it can serve a variety of functions depending on the context of that behavior. So we do have to kind of look at, again, what's occurring before the behavior and what's occurring after. That's kind of evoking and maintaining it to figure out the reason why they're doing it. Obviously, if a child kicks you and you give them a cookie, they're going to pretty quickly learn kicking serves the function of gaining access to a cookie, okay? And sometimes it can be a little more complicated to figure out, but usually with just looking at those few contingencies, we can figure out kind of what's going on here. So that same behavior, again, can serve multiple functions. And then where it gets a little trickier is where one behavior starts with one function and quickly takes on another function. So I have this highlighted here, and it says, think scratch off lottery ticket. So you guys have all done this, right? Like, I'm not the only one who like plays these scratch off lottery tickets, right? Everybody knows. So why do we do that? We do that because we want to win the $1 million jackpot, right? Like, we're in it for the big payoff. So if I get a ticket and I scratch that off and I get $1 million, obviously I'm going to play that game again, right? Like, I got what I wanted. It served the function. But let's say I get that lottery ticket, I scratch it off, and I don't get the $1 million, but I do get another ticket to play again. All right, that's kind of like a behavior taking on a secondary function. It's not the reason why I started the behavior of scratching off, but it's definitely enough for me to play that game again, okay? So an example would be, let's say your child starts tantruming to gain access to the iPad. So pretty easy to figure out, why are you doing this? To gain access to the iPad, right? And so I'm like, I'm not gonna let you have the iPad because I don't want you to think tantruming is how you get the iPad. But in the midst of this, we have a 5-minute conversation about why you can't have the iPad. I'm trying to reason with you. I get down to your level. I make eye contact. We're kind of having this exchange. 5 minutes later, at the end, we hug it out. And you're like, I feel really good because they didn't get the iPad for that tantrum. But what did they just get? Yeah, 5 minutes of uninterrupted mom attention, right? So that is that ticket to play that game again. It's not why I started this, but it's definitely good enough for me to play again, right? Usually behaviors become multiply controlled, and the secondary function is attention, okay? And I don't stereotype very often. This is the one stereotype that I do hold true, and I've yet to ever be corrected on it. No one's ever proved me wrong. Individuals with Down syndrome love their parents' attention more than anything else in the world. I cannot compete. I could have a unicorn that sprays glitter and bubbles and sings the Baby Shark song, and it would not compete with the parents' attention, okay? So it's amazing. It's an incredibly powerful teaching tool. You guys are very lucky. If all of the kids I served worked for their parents' attention to the same degree, I would be like on top of the world. I'd be a millionaire, okay? People would beg, they'd line up for years to get my service, okay? I don't have that tool at my disposal. You guys are very lucky to have that at your disposal. So be aware, your attention is a very powerful tool. So we'll talk about how to use that in an effective way to get what you want rather than what you don't want, okay? So before I move on, do you guys have any questions on this? Yes. Oh no, this is the first time ever. Okay. Oh, maybe. Well, I will be, to be fair, you might be right on that. I don't work in the adult population as much. All right. Well, so just like any typical adult, right? So we'll talk about how to find another effective reinforcer, and I'll keep that in my pocket now. That's the first time I've ever been corrected on it, so way to bring me down. Just joking, just joking. But we'll talk about finding other effective reinforcers then, okay? All right, so a lot of what I'm gonna be talking about today is focusing on replacement behaviors. So it is easy to get caught up when our children are doing things we don't want them to do and focusing on that, right? Typically when things are going well, we don't really think that much about it. It really becomes a problem when there's a problem, right? Like if things are going well, we kind of just let it be. If they're playing quietly in their room, not interrupting anybody, we don't want to go in there because the moment they see us, they're going to be like, play with me. And you're like, no, I just want to drink my coffee. I just want quiet time. So that the problem that we run into with this is that oftentimes then they are not getting opportunities to learn until a problem behavior occurs. So we often wait for crisis situations and then we try to teach. And sometimes, like, for example, the classroom teacher, you probably have a classroom of multiple children and you're kind of always having to go to the squeaky wheel and deal with that situation. And that's just the nature of the beast there. But unfortunately, what happens is we're trying to teach kids in a crisis situation. And so I use this example. If you are fighting with your spouse about how to load the dishwasher, bowls go on top. No, bowls go on bottom. No, bowls go on top. I've told you 1,000 times, bowls go on the bottom. If you put them on the top, they don't get clean, they go on the bottom. You are fighting about this, and they pull out the manual, and they're like, oh, look, it says the bowls go on the bottom. You don't hear anything about that, right? All you're thinking is, I'm gonna throat punch you. That's it. I'm mad. You might be sleeping on the couch tonight. You better sleep with one eye open. We're fighting, okay? That's the worst time to teach anybody, when you're already in an escalated state, yet that's oftentimes what we do with our children.
Could you explain to my wife that I am right? For 46 years.
Yes. I actually just watched a comedy special, and he went over that too. It was kind of funny. I will teach you how to shape your wife's behavior so that you can get her to do what you want, okay? Now remember, these things that I'm talking about, these are behaviors. All of us engage in behaviors, not just children with disabilities, not just children with delays. Every living thing engages in behaviors, and these same principles shape all of our behaviors, okay? So you can use them on your spouse, you can use them on your neurotypical children, you can use them on your students. Okay, so the big takeaway from this is think of the things that you want your child to learn and practice those before the crisis occurs. Do not wait for the situation to occur. And I understand, I have 3 young children at home. I run a business. I have a life. I'm always tired. I don't want to spend 5 or 10 minutes a day working on things. Sometimes I don't want to have to put that effort forward. But what happens is I find then I get into a cycle where the crisis is happening and then I'm getting mad, I'm getting upset, and we're in this terrible cycle. So I always have to remind myself, even as a behavior analyst, to focus on what I want them to learn and to put that effort up front, because that little bit of effort up front makes a huge amount of impact and it improves our quality of life so much, okay? So if you can, set aside those 5 to 10 minutes and practice, okay? All right. So the next thing, reinforcers. So in behavior analysis, the biggest tool we have at our disposal is reinforcers. And what this is, by definition, is something that immediately follows a behavior and increases the future likelihood of that behavior. Okay, so something that's important to note here, the immediacy. It must immediately follow that behavior. And it also must increase the future likelihood of that behavior occurring. So this is something that's often there's like a lot of misconception or misuse of the term reinforcer kind of in the common general population, because what a lot of people think is you give something to a child that they like and they're gonna do what you want. And that's not how reinforcement works. In the moment, we are giving them something that they want, hopefully, or like, that increases the future likelihood of that behavior. So I don't know if I've effectively reinforced a behavior until I see that behavior increasing. So if you're giving a child a cookie for doing something and it's not going anywhere, that means that's not an effective reinforcer. And sometimes people don't understand that because they're like, oh, they like cookies. So we'll talk about how to fix that a little bit in a moment. But really, it's important to note that in the moment, we're trying to reinforce. And we have to watch, does the behavior increase? If it does, great. If it doesn't, we need to change it up. All right, so identifying potential reinforcers for your child, observing what they go towards, they gravitate towards, ask them, give them choices, assess motivation. So figure out something that they might be motivated for. Simply liking something does not mean it's an effective reinforcer. And we'll kind of talk about how to take something they like and turn it into an effective reinforcer. And then we cannot assign reinforcing value to others. This is a big one that I run into. People will try to say, oh, well, that's not age appropriate, or that's not, it looks weird. That's not, they shouldn't have that. And we cannot tell someone something else is valuable. I can't make that happen. So what you have to do is figure out what works for your learner and basically harness the power of that. If you're really into spoons, that looks a little quirky, okay? But who cares? We can use spoons. And maybe I have a rule. It's in the privacy of your own bedroom or in the privacy of your own home. We all are a little bit of a weirdo, right? Like we all do things we don't want our neighbors to see us do. But at home, we do it. We just don't take it out in the community, right? So same rule applies to our kiddos. If you're a 13-year-old boy and you love yourself some princess stuff, cool, in your room. Like, we're not going to take this down the halls of school, right? We're not going to invite friends over and like, let's play dress up, unless they're into it too. I mean, sometimes they are. But I would never want to remove something that could be an effective reinforcer completely from someone's repertoire. I would be like, let's take advantage of that. But you can't be like, well, you're a 15-year-old boy, so instead of Blue's Clues, you should like Spider-Man. That child might be like, no, I don't like Spider-Man. I don't want to do that. Sorry, I clicked this a little too soon. So we cannot make someone like something. And then the best reinforcers, with this, we get a lot of flack in behavior analysis because we use edibles. But the reason why is because they don't have to be taught to like them. So oftentimes people really love food. They go away on their own. So once they eat them, they're gone. I don't have to take it away. I can deliver it rapidly. So it's readily available, quick, right there. And don't forget, with reinforcement, immediacy is important. And then it can be given out in sizes. So that's why oftentimes people will see in behavior analysis us using edibles. But those are the reasons. They are very effective and they hit all these kind of highlight components that we love. Now, same can be done with verbal praise. Same can be done with bubbles. If I have the musical device and it's on my person and I control it, same can be done there. So we have other things as well, but oftentimes that's why people are like, oh, it's like dog training because you're giving them a treat. But the reason why is because it has so many components that are really effective. All right. So we kind of talked about liking something doesn't make it an effective reinforcer. So how can we take something that I like or enjoy and actually turn it into an effective reinforcer? So a lot of times when I go into an environment and a family says they don't have anything that's going to work, they won't work for anything. It's not that they don't have things that would work as effective reinforcers. It's because as parents, we've enriched their environment so much so that they have access to all the things that they want or need, that they don't have to work for it. If your child can get into the pantry and get their own food, get to the fridge, get their own juice, go to their room and get all their favorite toys, they know how to pop in that DVD and play it, they know how to swipe that iPad and play those games. If they don't have to go through you to get something, why would they, right? Perfect sense. I wouldn't go to work if I just could snap my fingers and have $1 million land in my hand, right? Like, so same for our kiddos. They're not going to work for something when they have free access to it. So looking at these principles of reinforcer effectiveness, these are the things that you can manipulate if you find that you're having trouble identifying some effective reinforcers or you need to add more to the list of things that you can utilize. So first one is deprivation. We already kind of talked on that. No one's going to work for something when they have free access to it, right? So you want to make sure that they have limited access to the item. And oftentimes sweets like candy, ice cream, cookies, those are already on deprivation, which is why it makes it an effective reinforcer. And then also you want to make sure it's being used at a time that when, like, let's say a cookie is not going to be nearly as effective after they've eaten a big lunch. So they've got to be hungry. So it's got to be something that's on deprivation a little bit. So we basically control access to it. They can't go get it on their own. The immediacy. So reinforcers will reinforce the behavior it follows. So immediacy is important for a couple of reasons. One, the faster it's delivered, the more effective that reinforcer is. So if you can get it in there in under 2 seconds, great. I always joke, I shape up what I call the baby bird effect because I pop the food like right in their mouth, like pop that M&M right in there. And so like eventually as I'm like walking by a kid or something, you'll just see them like opening their mouth, like, is an M&M coming? Ah, like, ah. So I'm like, I'll take care of that later. If I pop it right in that mouth though, it's a lot faster than them putting it in their hand and then delivering it themselves. I will say occasionally though, I forget that some kids don't like that. And I'll be like, here, let me put this in. And they're like, what are you doing? Like, stop it. So I gotta remind myself, not everybody wants me to feed them like a baby bird. But immediacy, and the other reason why, not only is it more effective the quicker it's delivered, you don't want another behavior to get in there before you reinforce that desired behavior. So if I tell a child, for example, hey, clap your hands, and they do it, I don't want to have to turn around and look for an effective reinforcer because I don't know what this kid is doing behind my back. They could be picking their nose, right? And then I turn around and I give them an M&M. What did I just reinforce? Not clapping hands, I'll tell you that much, okay? So you want to deliver it rapidly. So if you were to go to a clinic, as I think one family here is in a clinic, you would often see somewhere between 3 to 5 effective reinforcers for that learner readily available. Like if they're going to be using edibles, those edibles are already prepped and ready to go. I can cut an M&M into 8 pieces, okay? Be impressed. I actually have a colleague that can do it into 12 pieces, so I'm like not as impressive. One of these days, I want them to make mini Skittles, okay? Those mini M&Ms are a godsend. Mini Skittles have not come yet. I don't know why, but if you guys could all put in that request, like that would be awesome for me, because it takes a lot of time to cut them up into tiny pieces, okay, for us. So, but if it's chips or cookies, it's all prepped, ready to go. If it's bubbles, the lid is off, the wand is prepped, it's full of the bubble liquid stuff, ready to go. If it's a movie that we're using, it's pulled up. All I have to do is press play. It's kind of, everything is prepped for rapid delivery, okay? And then size. So size of reinforcers. We want to make sure that when we're delivering reinforcement, the size of that reinforcer matches the response effort that we've been given. So if I ask a child to do something and they kind of do it, but then they need a little help to finish it, or they kind of give a sloppy response, but you know, they're gonna get kind of that basic, like, you kind of did it. So I was like, that's kind of what I wanted a little bit better. Or maybe I needed to hand over hand help you do it because you can't do it yet. So I'm still gonna give you a reinforcer for letting me hand over hand and showing you this. I wanna reinforce this behavior. But if I move from having to hand over hand and then you go to an independent response, I wanna give you a big amount of reinforcement. I wanna give a big reaction to that versus a little one. So we can dole out the amount of reinforcer they get by size, and they don't have to be aware of this. It happens automatically. The behavior that accesses the most reinforcement is going to be the behavior that they do, okay? So if I have something where I get a little bit and I have something where I get a lot, I'm gonna start doing the thing that gets me a lot of it, okay? And so if you take nothing else from this other than remember to practice the behaviors you want, don't wait for a crisis situation, and this next thing that I go over, if you take nothing else home, you will still go home with knowledgeable information that hopefully will have significant impact on your child's quality of life as well as your quality of life, okay? Reinforcement by size. Think of how we as humans respond when someone does something we like, okay? What do? Thank you so much, a little smile, maybe a pat on the back. Thank you, I appreciate you, thank you, right, yeah. But think about what we do when we're mad. And how many times have I told you, stop pulling your sister's hair? No, go to your room. How many times have I told you? Okay, so just going off reinforcement by size. Let's say you're a child who maybe has some social barriers. You don't fully comprehend good things, good attention versus bad attention, and all you see is size of attention. What are you gonna go for? Are you gonna go for that happy response, or are you gonna go for the one that gets your mom really riled up? You're gonna go for the one that gets you really riled up, and you probably see this. I see it in my own children. If I am like, get off those stairs, you are not supposed to be climbing on that banister, you see that wicked little smirk, right? You see them doing things to get under your skin because they know, they're like, I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get that reaction. But it's not because they're being malicious. It's because they're getting a bigger reinforcer when we give a bigger reaction, okay? So if you can change that contingency when they are being inappropriate or doing something you don't want, be as non-reactive as possible. You can redirect them, you can correct them, but don't give that big response. Just like, nope, we don't do that. Bring you down. We're not going to have a conversation about it or whatever. I'm just going to gently take you to your room because I'm not going to give you a big amount of attention. Go non-reactive when they're doing something you don't want, and go over the top absurd reactive when they're doing something you do want. And you're going to see that contingency shape those behaviors pretty rapidly. And this works across everybody. I mean, adults, children, teenagers, we all respond to attention, okay? So this will work. Now, I tell people you need to feel a little bit ridiculous when you're doing it, okay? You need to feel a little fake. You need to feel like a cheerleader. You need to feel like you're going to be embarrassed if someone sees you doing this. Go big, okay? Okay, because it has to compete with the amount of attention they're getting when they're doing this something we don't want, okay? But I have had a few people say, I can't do that. That is not in my nature. It's just something I can't do. So we just talk about things that you can do. I had a little girl down in Columbus, Indiana. I went and did a home consultation with them, kind of went over this concept, and mom was like, I can't do that. So we were just talking about, what can you do? She can play or she can sing Taylor Swift songs. So when her daughter is doing things she wants, her and her daughter love Taylor Swift, she'll sing Taylor Swift songs. When she's not going to sing the Taylor Swift song. And that contingency, that switch was enough to get that little girl in 3 days. Their morning routine went from like all out war to her getting up, getting dressed, getting ready for school. And mom was like, it's a miracle. She used some choice words in there too. I won't repeat it. I don't know how sensitive some of you are, but the text I got, I was like, I will save this forever. That's right, it is. And then sometimes I have dads like, I can't do that. I'm not going to be a cheerleader. That's fine. You know what dads are really great at? Being physical. Give them tickles, give them hugs, little physical contact, patting them on the back, whatever that is, if that works for you. Men can sometimes do like, I'll give them a hug, I'll give them a high five, I'll rustle up their hair. So contingent touch, you're doing appropriate things. I'm giving you a lot of physical touch. You're not doing what I want, that touch goes away, okay? So you just find what works for you and what you're comfortable with. But it does need to be very clear. You're doing something I want, big reaction. You're doing something I don't want, minimal reaction, okay? And then contingency. On this one, basically it just means be as consistent as you can. If they are, I don't know, told to give up the iPad, and you're like, when I say give up the iPad, I mean turn it off and hand it to me. But then sometimes if they throw a little tantrum and you're like, well, okay, you don't have to give it up right now. I'll let you have it for a few more minutes, or then maybe grandma lets them have it. If there's unclear expectations, we can't get upset with them then for not responding the way we want, right? So we just have to be pretty clear on what our expectations are when we give these cues, okay? Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions on that so far? Okay. So this next video is one of our learners in the clinic, and this is just a video to show what reinforcers are. I often hear from families when I'm doing presentations like this, they'll say like, well, I don't want to have to give them something for when they're supposed to do something. Like, I shouldn't have to give them something. And I say, that's not how it works though, right? That's not how it works. So think of your child that you toilet trained. Yeah, they're supposed to go on the potty, but you first have to teach them that, and you have to give them reinforcement for doing that. Our kiddos, no matter how old they are, no matter what the behavior is, the same is true for them. We have to meet them where they are, teach them, and then we fade all of these things out. Everything I talk about today, giving reinforcement, et cetera, all of these things are short-term teaching interventions with long-term gains, very much like toilet training, okay? So this is what a reinforcer might look like. Let's see if I can get this to play. On here. Not great with technology, so nope. Do you know how to get this one to play? The videos? Yeah, can you get I don't know how to make the video play, sorry. Yeah, it's just going to the next slide.
Do you know what slide that was?
Yeah, no, sorry. Up. Yeah, that one. Oh, there. There's a press. There we go.
Doesn't look like it's a video.
We'll give her a minute to try and figure out. If it doesn't work, then. Yeah, it's clicking to the next slide.
Yeah. I'm really sorry.
I'm not great with technology, so I can't help on this. But I did send it with videos that work.
I don't see a play.
Hmm.
I'm really sorry that
Oh,
that's not
that's right.
working.
Well, if it doesn't work, I can always email it to you if you're interested so you can see some of these videos. I have permission from all the parents for these presentations, but the videos are cute. I think it would just move to the next slide on it.
Sure, I
Okay,
apologize.
that's all right. Let's see. Let's see. QuickTime not available. So it doesn't, this computer doesn't have like a player on it. That's what it is. Okay. All right. So sorry, everybody. We're going to miss the videos today, which is really disappointing because they're adorable. But we'll move on. We'll move on. All right. So we went over these. This is just a video of, oh.
Hi, Mom. Good.
Baby bird effect right there. Did you see how quick she delivered that? Let's see if we can get it to play again. I don't know how. I don't know how I made this work. Yeah. Does anybody know how I made that work?
Hi, Mom. Good.
All right. Yep. Find mom. He found mom. So this little boy, he made eye contact with the material, and he found mom. Immediate reinforcement right there in the mouth. So that was just an example of immediacy. All right. Let's see if for the next one will play for us. All right. Here we go. This is reinforcement by size. Okay. So you saw that little boy. He got a little piece of an edible for that little test man. This is a little girl walking for the first time. I hope you see this. So there's like 5 adults in there cheering for her because the quality of response there was a lot of effort, right? She's walking for the very first time that distance without a walker. So we had to make sure we gave her a big reinforcer for that, okay? All right. Punishment. Okay, so punishment is something that oftentimes in the general population, outside of our science, is often a taboo word. So you'll hear schools like, oh, we only do positive behavior supports, we do no punishment, etc. And that's because punishment is often, again, misunderstood. People think of punishment as like this really terrible thing. And when you don't know it and you do these, people go a little overboard with it, that can be true. But by definition, punishment is simply something that follows a behavior and decreases the future likelihood of that behavior. So punishment is also very natural. It can be examples of like turning off a movie when the child throws the remote, yelling at a child for hitting his brother, getting a speeding ticket, things like that happen. But the kicker is punishment can also evoke responses in the child that we don't want. So you can get an emotional backlash. So maybe we've all been there. We've yelled at our child, and then they start crying and like throwing a big tantrum, and then we feel awful, and it's like they feel awful. So that can happen. Okay. Punishment can also be something like if you're delivering punishment constantly for your child, they'll start to avoid you. Okay, because they're like, I don't want it. Basically, you become a cue that punishment's going to happen. They're not going to want to hang out with you. No one wants to be the parent that's always punishing their kid, right? But we find like, oh, I have to punish them for doing this thing they did 7 hours ago at school, right? So we don't want to be in that position either. That's just not fun for us. And then also, by definition, punishment decreases a behavior. What it does not do is effectively teach. Okay, so by definition, punishment decreases a behavior. So oftentimes people misunderstand punishment as teaching because they're like, if they don't do this thing, they're gonna figure out this other thing they need to do instead. And that may be true of, say, my 6-year-old son. If he's playing in the house with a car or whatever, and he starts throwing the car and I yell at him, that's an effective punisher to him. He will stop yelling, or he'll stop throwing that car because I've punished that. But in his skill repertoire, he has about 30 other behaviors to simply just replace that. He has a ton of different ways to play. Often our kids with learning barriers and social barriers, they don't just have a repertoire of behaviors to replace that. Or even if they have another alternative behavior in their repertoire, they don't have the skill to just replace it naturally. We have to teach them how to do that, right? So if I use punishment for a reason, let's say a behavior is dangerous to themselves or others, I want to make sure I'm effectively teaching on the other side of it, okay? So let's say a kid, I talked about coming up and kicking me earlier to get access to a cookie. That child comes up, kicks me. I can yell at them, make them cry, they go away. They won't kick me anymore, right, to get that cookie. But what I've not done is given them a way to get a cookie. So it's not like their quality of life is better. They still want a cookie. They don't know how to get it. So what I need to do is if I'm going to punish that behavior, I need to also be going to them and constantly teaching them how to ask for a cookie. So whether it's saying cookie, signing cookie, using a picture to exchange it, I need to teach them how to gain access to that cookie, okay? And punishment too, if all we do is punish and we don't teach an effective replacement behavior, eventually so he comes up, he kicks me, I punish it. By yelling at him, he goes away. Eventually he's gonna be like, man, I really want that cookie. And the only thing I've ever done, to get a cookie is to kick her. It might be worth it to kick her and see, maybe this time a cookie will come. So you'll get spontaneous recoveries of these behaviors too, because when you don't have a behavior to replace it, you're gonna go back to that. And that's even true. Even if you teach a replacement behavior, you might sometimes get a spontaneous recovery. Those happen. Just make sure you respond appropriately. You don't reinforce that behavior that was undesired, and life will go on. We had a learner who had a spontaneous recovery. It had been about 3.5 years since he had engaged in fecal smearing, and he had a spontaneous recovery one morning. But we didn't reinforce it, and it went away, and I'm hoping next time it's 5 years before we see it again, because as a behavior used to. So those things happen, and when the behaviors that used to happen a lot pop back up, oftentimes families will respond very emotionally because there's a lot of emotional baggage tied to that, like if they hit or something. But just be aware, anything that's ever happened in a repertoire, a behavior repertoire, it's likely you'll see it again in the future. Just try to keep these principles in mind and not reinforce it. And also our kids throw curveballs. So they're gonna do quirky things. One day, maybe just out of the blue, they're gonna just like strip down and pee on their clothes. I don't know why. Why do you decide to do that today? Just try not to reinforce it, and hopefully it'll go away. It's hard, yep. So being as non-reactive as possible. All right, and so one of the mantras that our staff hear constantly around the clinic is you can't have time out without time in. So you do have to make sure when they're doing appropriate things and they're engaging in appropriate responses, they're getting a big reaction and lots of fun. We're bringing the fun so that when they do something crazy, like strip their clothes down and pee on it, just like out of the blue, and we go non-reactive, it's like a shift in their world. They can feel it, okay? They're like, whoa. All of a sudden, I'm not getting songs or bubbles or a lot of attention, like what's going on here? So that they're like, oh, that just wasn't as much fun as I thought it was gonna be. So I'm not gonna do that again, okay? Any questions on punishment? Okay. Oh, yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it took all this time for somebody like me to come through and push the issue. Like, maybe there's something wrong. We need to figure it out. How else can we reinforce the negative behavior that is constant? When you try everything, you do everything, and he thinks he overpowers you and has every right to do whatever he wants, but there's really no other support.
Mm-hmm. So yes, so she's asking, basically she has a 17-year-old who she has not had for very long, but he has a long learning history of engaging in really inappropriate and undesired behaviors to get what he wants. And he basically is just saying, I don't have to do what you tell me to do. I can just get what I want regardless. So it sounds like he's kind of maybe using his physical strength a little bit. It is hard when they can physically overpower you, but what we have to do is identify effective reinforcers. If he has access to a car or access to a phone or the internet, TVs, etc., so then we've got to figure out a way that we control access to those things and slowly build him up. So we can talk, let me finish this, and then we can talk teenagers, especially 17-year-olds who are probably pretty high skill set, has a lot of, maybe a few deficits here and there, but a lot of high skill sets. Those can be more challenging, certainly, because they can physically overpower you. So we can talk a little bit more about him and some of the stuff. Okay. So schedules of reinforcement. So there are a lot of schedules of reinforcement. There are really only two that you need to be aware of, though, right now, kind of in the immediacy. So one is continuous. So every instance of a behavior acts as reinforcement. So when we identify something we want our child to learn or do, every time we have them do it, it needs to access reinforcement. This is used to teach. However, behaviors on this schedule of reinforcement are weaker. So once a skill is learned, we want to move it to what we call an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. An intermittent schedule of reinforcement is, again, by definition how it sounds, intermittently reinforced. Sometimes it acts as reinforcement and sometimes it doesn't. So let's say I'm teaching a child to clap their hands. Very simple. Every time they do it, I give them reinforcement. It's on a continuous schedule. And now I think if I say clap your hands, they're going to do it. I'm at like 80% sure. And that's a made up number, totally arbitrary, 80%. It's not backed by science. But if I just think they're going to do it, I think they've got it down. I'll move it to an intermittent schedule. So sometimes I'll say clap your hands, I'll give them a little reinforcer, and sometimes I won't. And then over time, I fade that schedule of reinforcement out. So, every other one it gets it, and then it's like maybe 2 times they don't get it, and then maybe 4 times they don't get it, and I just fade it out over time. And that puts behaviors on a stronger, it strengthens them, a stronger schedule there. And so that's what we use to maintain behaviors once it's taught. And that, just by definition, seems counterintuitive, because you would think, why would something be stronger when it sometimes acts as reinforcement versus when it always acts as reinforcement? It's a little bit against how you would think, right? So I have this thing here. It says, think new car versus old car. So if you have a new car and you go out and you turn the key, every morning that new car, turn that key, it starts, you drive off, right? If you go out one morning, you turn that key, it doesn't start, you might try turning it 1 or 2 more times, but you're pretty quickly gonna give up and go inside and call a tow truck, right? Because you're so used to that behavior working. When it suddenly doesn't, you're like, oh, I guess I'll give up on that, right? But if you're on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement, so if you're driving a 1993 Eagle Talon, such as myself in college, sometimes you go out, you turn that key, the car starts, sometimes it doesn't. You go out one morning, it doesn't start, no big deal, you're used to that. Try it a few more times, that's annoying. Try it a few more times, you're like, okay, now I'm getting annoyed. You slam the steering wheel, crank it a few more times, still not working. You get out, you slam the door, you kick the tire, you go inside, maybe wait a few more hours, you go back out and try again. So when it's on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement, you can see that when they're used to it not always working, they're going to go longer and harder and bigger to try and get that behavior to work. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? So it's just think new car versus old car, okay? We will go longer, stronger, bigger. Now, if I do all those things, I kick that tire, I slam that car door, I cuss at it a little bit, wait a few hours, go back out, and the car starts. Next time my car doesn't start, I'm willing to do all of that again, right? To get that car to start, and then more. So behaviors are the same way. If I want the behavior to last, even when it doesn't work every single time, I need to make sure it intermittently accesses reinforcement, and it will go bigger, longer, harder. The same is true for undesired behaviors. It is just as easy to shape undesired behaviors as it is desired behaviors, okay? So perfect example, sometimes our lovely little learners like to tantrum at the store to get access to a cookie or a candy bar, right? And sometimes we are in a hurry, or we've got stuff going on, or we're just embarrassed, or we're not emotionally in a healthy spot, so we will give them that candy to get out of that store, right? Like, you win, you got a tantrum, whatever, let's just get out of here. But then sometimes we're like, I don't have anywhere to be, and I'm just not in the mood today. You want tantrum 45 minutes? That's fine. I've got a coffee in hand and nothing better to do. Just like, I'll wait you out, okay? And so when we leave after 45 minutes, it might be like sweating and like claw marks down our face or something, who knows? But we feel empowered, like, I did it, I won. But the problem is, if sometimes they get reinforcement for doing it and sometimes you fight it, all you've actually done is put it on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. So it makes it harder on yourself and the child, because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And so they're just going bigger, longer, harder, trying to get what they want, okay? So give yourself permission. If it is not something that you are gonna tackle every single time consistently until it's handled, don't tackle it at all. First sign of it, give in. Just give in, cave. Like, you're gonna start a tantrum, I give it to you, right? Here's your candy bar, let's get out of here. Because by doing that, you're putting it back on that continuous schedule of reinforcement, and you're making that behavior weaker. So when we go to actually target it, when you're like, okay, I am ready, I'm in an emotional, healthy spot for the next couple weeks, we're gonna go to the store, and I'm consistently not gonna let them have access to the candy when they tantrum, it will be much easier for you when you do that versus trying to sometimes fight it and sometimes not. Does that make sense? So when you are giving your child, the iPad because they're crying, or ice cream or whatever it is, just feel good knowing this is based on science. I am doing what the behavior analyst said. There are decades of research to support. I should give in right now, not fight it. And then we'll fight it later when you're actually ready to, okay? Does that make sense to everyone? Yes.
How does this apply to adults?
So the same principles shape behaviors in adults. So is there a particular behavior that you're thinking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, there are two. One is screaming.
Okay.
And trying to determine if it's medical reason or just behavior.
Uh-huh.
And then the other one is just morning routine.
Okay.
The only way to get dressed some mornings is if I'm sitting there in the room. This is with an adult.
Uh-huh.
And then there are other mornings where she has a list, she just does her routine.
Okay.
And so I've done both high praise when she does it right, and sometimes have to fight her and get her dressed when she won't. And then I've done contingency, and it doesn't carry.
So what we will have to do is we'll have to look at those specific situations and manipulate kind of like the reinforcers that are being used, the schedule, and how we're fading it. One of the things that will often happen is, and I'm not saying this is this case, but often happen is once a child is doing what we want, we stop reinforcing it rather than fading out that reinforcement slowly. So what that would do is what's called an extinction procedure. So that is actually, I'll talk about extinction in just a moment. So we can circle back to these and talk about some of the principles that could be at play there and some tweaks that you can make to maybe make it more effective, okay? Okay, so planned ignoring. This is another one you'll often hear people say like, oh, just ignore that behavior, ignore that behavior. Often misused by people who aren't as familiar with how to use this effectively. Planned ignoring is an intentional, you plan ahead, right? It's planned, ignoring of a behavior that's attention seeking, okay? This doesn't work when the behavior is escape motivated, because if you ignore a kid when they're escape motivated, they're just like, great, I don't have to do what you want. You're leaving me alone. Awesome. People will often make that mistake. You're doing something bad. You don't want to do your math homework. You're being naughty. I'm going to ignore you. Kid's like, party, right? So this only works when it's attention seeking, okay? This can include not looking at the child, not making eye contact, orienting away, walking away if necessary. The confusing thing about this is not ignoring the child. It is ignoring the behavior. So if I have asked my child to go get their shoes and they start screaming, I'm going to pretend like they're not screaming. And I'm still going to help them walk over and get their shoes. I'm not responding to the undesired behavior while simultaneously still being very aware of my child and what I want them to do and what I've asked of them. So usually, again, we want to set it up in advance. We know it's for things that are to get a reaction out of us. And we have to make sure that we don't then just like completely walk away from them and ignore them completely. Now, if out of nowhere, they're in the living room and you're in the kitchen and they start screaming and you're like, I know they're just doing this to get me to come in there. You don't have to go in there. I mean, assuming you're like, you can tell the difference between the like, I hurt myself and like, you know, that I want access to the cookie screams, right? Like everybody knows, like there's a different level of screams. So you don't have to go in there and attend to them if that sort of thing, if you know it's just attention seeking, a way to get you in there, a response. But for the most part, it's a little bit hard to do this for a lot of people. Sometimes even the smallest reaction, a rolling of the eyes or a sigh, can be enough attention, enough of a reaction to maintain the undesired behavior. So an example I give, I'm a wonderful mom, but this does not highlight that. Okay, so driving in the car, right? Phone rings, pick up the phone. What immediately happens from the back seat? Mom, mom, mom. Yep, you got it. Mom, mom, mom. Okay, so planned ignoring in that case is perfect because they are just doing this to get my attention. They're doing it because my attention is on something else. So if I ignore that behavior, they're going to give up on it, right? Now, if I turn around and say, what is it, honey? I'm on the phone, and I have a conversation. It's attention seeking. I've reinforced it. So I want to use planned ignoring. Now, the moment he's quiet, even if it's just like he's like, mom, 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 and he's been doing that for 5 minutes straight, and now he needs to take a big old breath, and he's like, I'm like, quiet. What is it, honey? Thanks for being quiet. I want to reinforce the desired behavior as soon as I can so that is the behavior that gets reinforcement, not that obnoxious one, okay? So a moment of silence, I'll give reinforcement. I'll say, oh, thank you for being quiet while I'm on the phone. In a moment when I finish up my phone call, I'll talk to you more. Or you can use what we call redirection or interruption and redirection, where if the child doesn't know the expected behavior, you can just, without giving a big reaction, kind of tell them, I'm on the phone, you need to be quiet, I'll talk to you when I'm done, but not a lot of reaction. And then that's it. And if they keep doing it, just ignore it for another minute, try and redirect again. But it is hard because a lot of people think planned ignoring is ignoring of the child, and that's not the case. We want to make sure that as soon as they engage in a desired behavior, we reinforce that. So even if it's been 20 minutes and they've been screaming in your ear while you're trying to talk on the phone, and you've been off this phone call for 19 minutes and 45 seconds because they've been screaming, you're still pretending to be on it because you're like, I'm not going to give you attention. As soon as they're quiet, as soon as they're appropriate, you want to make sure you give reinforcement. A lot of people will have a hard time with that because emotionally they're not ready. They're like, I'm mad at you, I'm gonna, but we got to make sure that those desired behaviors are accessing reinforcement, right? So we want to make sure that as soon as they do what we want, we give them that attention. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, extinction. This is a procedure where reinforcement for previously reinforced behavior is no longer accessing reinforcement. The reinforcement is discontinued, essentially. So an example would be if that child who comes up and kicks me, he has a history of getting a cookie when he kicks me. So he comes up one day, he kicks me, and I don't give him a cookie. I've now put that behavior on extinction. And what's really great about extinction is you'll see behaviors die off because, again, human nature, we're lazy. I don't know if you guys know this or not. We are not going to keep doing something that doesn't work for us. So if it doesn't work for us, it's going to go away. And it goes away without you having to punish and without that emotional backlash. So it works very well, very effective. But there is an extinction burst that will occur first. Before it goes away, it will get worse. And so what happens is we're going along, put it on extinction. You'll see the behavior get worse. So this kid comes up, kicks me, doesn't get a cookie, and he's like, oh, weird. That always works, right? And what did we talk about before? They'll go bigger, they'll go stronger, they'll go harder. So he was like, well, I guess I'll have to try and tackle her. Still didn't work. I didn't get a cookie. That's weird. Okay. What if I throw myself to the ground and I'm tantruming and screaming and crying and kicking? And they're like, no, still no cookie. Okay. Yo, here's her new iPhone. And I chuck it. If I'm like, oh, no, I cannot have you throw my iPhone. Here, just take the cookie. This is not worth it. All I've done in that moment is reinforced a worse behavior, okay? So if you don't think you'll be able to make it through the extinction burst, don't do it, okay? If you think it's gonna get to a level you can't continue to work through, don't do it, okay? Because it will get worse before it gets better. But right after he checks that iPhone, I have a case on it. You're not gonna break it, it's fine. He's like, man, that still didn't work. You'll see it die off pretty quickly and it'll be at pretty much 0 levels for a while. So it pop up a little bit. We talked about spontaneous recovery and it'll go back away again. So extinction is a very effective procedure for these things, but you do have to work through an extinction burst first. Any questions on that? Okay. And then just kind of highlighting again, problematic behaviors. So our kiddos are not doing things that don't serve them a function. So thinking in those terms, there's got to be a reason why they're doing what they're doing. It's not arbitrary. It's our job to figure out what that is and how we can start manipulating these variables we've talked about to change them, okay? And really, again, effective teaching up front will really help. And if you, at the end of the day, you're like, I really cannot figure this out, give me a call, I'll help you, okay? Love doing these things. All right, so where to start? Start with the simplest solution first. So don't overthink it. Don't think like, oh, what's going on? Are they tired? Are they anxious? Oh, you know, did they not sleep well? Like, are they upset because they started at a new school? Like, try to think simple solutions first. You probably have heard the saying, when you hear hoofbeats in the hallway, think horses, not zebras. It's a concept where we don't have a lot of zebras hanging around here in Indianapolis, right? So if you hear hoofbeats, it's probably a horse, not a zebra. Same thing with behaviors. Go with the simplest solution first, okay? Identify 1 to 3 behaviors that are the most critical that we want to shape and focus on those. Do not try and tackle everything at once. You will be overwhelmed and unsuccessful. It's just not worth it. So take the top 2 or 3 things that are most critical to you and really just focus on those. And with a few weeks of really intentional teaching on that, you should see some pretty significant results if you're following these principles. In fact, in our clinic, as behavior analysts, we're pretty obsessed with data collection. We want everything to be based on objective data. We don't have anything subjective going on, no thoughts or feelings on, I think this is working. No, it either is or it isn't. The data will show me. I say 3 to 5 sessions. If we don't see change in 3 to 5 sessions, we change what we're doing. We manipulate these variables until we get them to a point where they're successful. At home, that's not quite as realistic, so I usually say give it a couple weeks. And then when possible, look for big picture items. So if you're like, well, sometimes they'll go get their shoes and sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll come when I call for them, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll go put their plate on the table, sometimes they won't. That, to me, it's not each individual instance that's a problem. It's more just like the general compliance. Sometimes they're compliant, sometimes they're not. So we need to increase just compliance. When you tell them to do something, they do it. They'll learn that routine of, I do what you've asked, something good follows, and then compliance, that will help kind of bleed into a lot of other areas. And then teach and reinforce. It works. It really does. I promise, it works. And then this is, I just have some videos. So it's up to you guys. This is just some like videos of examples of these things in play. It's up to you guys. Would you guys rather have the next 10 minutes to look at videos? Or would you rather have the next 10 minutes to ask questions about your specific learner and situations that come up? Ask questions. Okay, so we'll circle back over here. So these, if you would like to see these videos and whatnot, again, just let me know. I'll email it to you, or Stephanie can send this to you if you would like. So back to yours. So sometimes your daughter will do her morning routine, and sometimes she will not. And it's like you have to go in there and make it happen, right? So the good news there is the skill of doing it is in her skill repertoire. You don't have to teach it from the ground up. Great, she has it. So all we have to do is make sure that when she does it, she's accessing enough reinforcement to increase the future likelihood of that behavior. So what we need to do is look at what is she gaining access to for doing this? So what are some of the things that are really valuable to her? iPad time, a donut after she's gotten ready for school or work, or
It's all in motivation, and I can't figure out the motivators for her.
okay.
So, iPad is something she gets regularly because she has total access to it. But if she's in her room, she doesn't have iPad, she doesn't have toys,
Mhm.
she doesn't have TV. And as a young adult, she just doesn't want to get up.
Mhm.
She has one thing that, there are two things that she enjoys doing out. One is, my husband teaches at the university. She has a chance to go over there and get on the computer. But even when I give her that, get up and get dressed, and we have breakfast, and go over there and spend the afternoon with Daddy. She's still, it's like, she's all excited about it, but it doesn't make her do it. It doesn't encourage her to.
Yeah.
And she likes like getting out in the community and going shopping or going bowling or mall walking. And she's excited about doing those things, but they don't encourage her to, oh, it's Tuesday, I get to do this, so I'm going to get dressed, I'm going to get
Mhm.
forward.
So it sounds like this one, the principles of reinforcer effectiveness, this is where you need to start manipulating things. You said she has pretty much free access, not in her room, but otherwise free access to like the iPad and these other things. You need to take more control of those and make sure that she's only getting them contingent upon these other things. And I know initially when someone has free access to something and then you take control of it, you're gonna get a little bit of pushback, right? Right, yeah. But she'll learn pretty quickly. If she wants what she wants, she better do what you've asked, okay? And so my recommendation would be look at this and figure out what is it that she has free access to or she gets regularly, whether she's behaved appropriately or not, and start manipulating those variables so that you control them and they're really only available contingent upon appropriate behavior. If you tell her in the morning to, hey, get up, get ready. As soon as you're ready, we can go see Dad at the university. And sometimes she gets up and goes, and sometimes it's an hour and a half and you finally get her dressed and you get out the door because you told her you would go and she's dressed. Reinforcement by size. Why would she still get to go do that? Just because she's now dressed. That quality of response. Okay, so right, so looking at those things though, kind of looking at it and evaluating critically, like really look, it's hard for us as people to look at our own behaviors. So really think through those sort of things and look at what is she getting? Because maybe she loves to go to the university, but maybe she didn't get to go do that, but then she got up and got to be on the iPad. She still got up and got to do something she really enjoys. So look at those things and determine, is she getting reinforcement at the same level for inappropriate behaviors as inappropriate behaviors? We need to really make sure there's a differentiation there. And sometimes just, especially if she has a lot of language, verbally mediating, no. Okay, okay. And maybe like a visual or something, but I do like to, as much as possible, let learners know what the contingencies are gonna be up front. So like, as soon as you get up and get ready, this thing that you really love will be available. And it's not something you have free access to, but it's only available if you get up and get ready. If I have to get you ready, it's not available and you're gonna have to try again tomorrow. A little bit. But think of it in terms of toilet training, right? Put a lot of effort in for a week or two, and you should see long-term gains where if she gets up and starts getting ready on her own every morning, you don't have to fight it. That's gonna be a lot easier, right? Yeah. So, and if you are interested, I have a lot of students that are in their coursework to become behavior analysts. They have to do a certain amount of unpaid time. Oh, Evansville. Well, there are clinics down there, though. You could always be like, hey, you got anybody who will come do some pro bono work, a little complimentary. But yeah, it does take effort up front. It is going to be a challenge. So I don't want to sugarcoat that, right? But if it's important enough that you're like, this really impacts our quality of life, it really impacts what she's capable of doing in a day, it might be worth it to you to put in that.
Part of it is also we're dealing with migraines and intestinal issues, and I don't always know
Mhm.
when our refusal to do that is associated with not feeling good, because it's not always obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And if it is not feeling good, and I'm doing the other, the not feeling good escalates.
Yeah. It is hard when there's like underlying medical issues. The problem is behaviors, whether there's an underlying medical issue or not, these same principles are in play. So she will learn to pretend she's sick to get out of doing it. She will, and then it's like on an intermittent schedule, so the behavior's stronger because sometimes she gets out of it when she throws these tantrums or whatnot, because sometimes we're like, well, maybe it's a migraine, I let her go. So she learns, sometimes I get out of it, sometimes I don't. So my kind of personal philosophy is we all have days we don't feel good. We all have migraines, we all have headaches. What would I want her to do instead of throwing a tantrum or refusing to comply? If I would want her to tell me she doesn't feel well, then I have to teach her how to do that, right? And reinforce it and let her escape and be okay with her escaping. Or I have to teach her it doesn't really matter whether that is true or not. You still have to get up and get ready. And then once you're ready, if you want to lay back down, that's your choice. Or if you want to go out, that's your choice. But the reinforcement will still follow. Unfortunately, when our kiddos do have limited language, they're not capable of telling us or letting us know, and we have to kind of base it off of, and maybe you could figure out a way in the morning to, like, maybe there's something else, like sometimes people will, has anybody heard of auditory processing disorder? Yeah, we hear that one a lot, okay? And people will be like, well, they have an auditory processing disorder, that's why they don't follow my directions. They have an auditory processing disorder, right? Well, yeah, and it's not really, most of the time I'm like, okay, so let me sparse this out. If I tell them to go get their shoes, they have an auditory processing disorder. But the moment I say, do you want ice cream? And they're like, yeah, I want ice cream. You can sparse these things out, right? So maybe what you can do before you place the demand of getting up and getting ready, you can have some little trick that you figure out. Is this a day where you aren't feeling well, or a day that you are gonna be okay and get up? So I don't know if there's like certain foods that maybe like, you could be like, hey, do you want to come eat a donut? And if she's like, I don't want to eat a donut, she's not feeling well. And then you're like, I'm not even going to place the demand, right? Because I know today's the day. So maybe you could, before that kind of whole thing happens, you could figure out a way to figure out, you know what I mean? Yeah. And then if you're like, okay, I got your number, girlfriend. Get up and get ready. Or maybe medicine. We have a learner, we taught him if he has a headache, we can ask him, do you need ibuprofen? And he says yes. She'll want that. Always loves medicine. I know, that's hard. Our kids learn.
She never did.
Mhm.
So I truly believe she has headaches. But we do occurrence.
Mhm.
And then I'll go through the district, tummy hurt, your eyes hurt, your ear. I won't give her head. And then I'll say, where do you hurt? But she's doing it a lot more.
Right, because that behavior accesses reinforcement. One, it accesses your attention, right? And two, yeah, I mean, I don't know what it is about medication, but kids are like, I love to take medicine. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But, okay, and we can stay in contact. My phone number and everything is on this. I didn't bring any cards with me, unfortunately, but you can definitely call or email, and I'd be happy to like help you tweak some things. Because the truth, you're gonna maybe do some of these things, and it's not gonna be an immediate fix. You might have to. Oftentimes, people think behavior analysis. We come in and they think we've like put on this big show and we do these crazy things. Oftentimes, it's the tiniest little tweaks and the contingencies that make a huge effort in the responses that we're getting. So sometimes it's just fine-tuning it a little bit. So, and then you were talking about screaming as well. Talk to me a little bit, like when does screaming occur? All the time? All over the place?
It's at home a lot.
Mm-hmm.
If we're headed to the store, it starts at home at the store. So I turn around and go home and just deal with it. But a lot of times, I think she's having like gas pains or something, just go to the bathroom, but she will not get up and go. Even though when I force her to get up and go, she feels better.
Mm-hmm.
She still will not. And some of it is tension of control over the TV. So some of it becomes a power struggle.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing. But we have tried screaming is bad and talk to her calmly. What can I do? How can I help? A lot of times I haven't had
Mm-hmm.
so to speak. So if I sit down with her, it calms her. But then if I get up to go do something,
Yeah.
so
So you literally just explained the behavior yourself. I mean, it's
some of it, but it's hard to tell when it is one or the other, and it's hard to change that because
yeah. Let me.
the screaming adds to the headache. The screaming adds to
Mm-hmm. So best course of action. Don't reinforce, so don't give her any attention. Be non-reactive to the screams as much as possible, okay? Non-reactive, she doesn't get your attention anymore, you don't come hang out with her. But knowing that she's gonna do it a lot for attention, practice her appropriately getting your attention. If she can just come up and put her hand on your arm and you're like, oh, you wanted my attention? Hugs, kisses, snuggle. Teach her a replacement to getting your attention. That would work for you guys. And practice it and reinforce, practice it and reinforce, practice it and reinforce. So that when she does scream and you're non-reactive, like she'll be like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then as soon as the screaming's done, it can be a second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds of not screaming. That's when you can go in and give attention. You can then be like, did you want my attention? This is how you get my attention, and then reinforce. And do it by size. See how this all kind of comes together too. Size, keep that in mind. If she screamed first and then you prompted and then she did that desired behavior, she gets less reinforcement than when she comes and does it spontaneously. And eventually you'll teach her to accept no to your attention and all those things as well. But to start with, to replace the screaming, even if you're like, it could be because she has to go to the bathroom, wait until she's calm, 10 seconds calm, and then prompt her to get your attention. You can take her to the bathroom. Or if you're like, I don't know, she's been screaming for 45 minutes, it could be, just take her to the bathroom, don't give her any attention, keep it non-reactive still. So the idea is a little bit of reinforcement when they're doing something undesired would not be so detrimental when we're getting a ton of reinforcement when we're doing what we want. You can't have time out without time in, right? So make sure time in is really valuable. And it takes conscious effort. I recommend to families, put visuals up for yourself to remind yourself to do these things, because it is easy. 2 days of her not screaming, it is very easy for us to quickly forget that screaming's a problem until it happens. And then we wait till that crisis moment, right?
we celebrate when we have good days.
Yeah.
We do a lot more out of the things that she wants to do. So I am very aware of that.
Yeah. So just maybe some tweaking here, and non-reactive, teach her a replacement. Yeah. And I think this is my cue that I'm out of time. So yeah. So yes, thank you.